It's 12 o'clock. We're just admitting the remains of individuals that are standing by, and we will get started within a few seconds. So I'd like to welcome everyone that has joined us so far. I see Danny, your hand is still raised. That's probably from previously, but we will get started. So it is now 12 o'clock Eastern Time. I'd like to welcome everyone to this special Assembly of First Nations National Virtual Forum on the amended Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy. And of course, the special session for 3 hours this afternoon. It's very important that we open in a good way. So I'd like to introduce our knowledge keeper, Leonard Weasel Traveler, who will be opening today's session. Leonard, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Chairman Fiddler. It's always an honor to lead in prayer. And again, morning, National Chief, Regional Chief, Chiefs, all technicians. In humility, I go to the Creator for special guidance, divine intervention, for the leadership to have the thought process, to put things together, to move our people forward, across this country. We're all faced with the same challenges which surround poverty, challenge of poverty, the other social issues that we have in our communities, with the fentanyl issues. We have a lot of problems. There's forest fires. There's clean water issues, so many issues. Creator, I ask you to empower our chiefs so that they can bring forward the necessary resources to bring some comfort, especially just the basic needs for our people, and also opportunities for economic development, opportunities for a level playing field with the rest of Canada, and especially for our national chief to give her blessings and guidance to continue to lead us. Everybody that's involved, all the administration people, all the technicians, I ask you, Creator, to bring us together so that we can move forward with these challenges that we have today, these challenging times. I ask you for those blessings, Creator, in humility and love from my heart, and I ask you, Creator, to give this love and blessings to all our chiefs, all our leaders. Hayos chipatapio, bakanishin chipuch and that's moiskan. Iniwagoma, Tabasama, Tokunoma, Matuenuguama, Natu Shum, oh, thank you. All my love, chiefs. All the best.
Miigwech, thank you so much to our knowledge keeper, Leonard Weasel Traveler, for opening today's session in a good way. So Miigwech once again. As I mentioned, this is the second virtual forum that the Assembly of First Nations is hosting for First Nations leadership to discuss the amended Bill C-5. During the first virtual forum, leadership requested that we clearly state at the beginning of this virtual forum that this is not consultation on behalf of the government, and that the Assembly of First Nations has not received any funding to host this session today and the previous session as well. Also, the Assembly of First Nations is hosting this space to help leadership prepare their own responses to Bill C-5 and how they want to move forward from here. So before we go ahead with the agenda, I want the agenda to be put up shortly, but I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items first. Just a couple of reminders. There is simultaneous translation available for both English and French. You can select the language by clicking on the translation button at the bottom of your screen. Of course, it's a globe icon. Just click that and select either French or English. There's also closed captioning available for this session that can be accessed through a special link in the email that you would have received to join this session. The IT team's also sharing the link in the chat. So if you have access to the chat, you can check the chat. There should be a link there for that. The Assembly of First Nations has prepared several technical documents that were shared in advance of the session. You should have those documents in your email, but those documents are also available on the Assembly of First Nations website, and AFN staff will share those links in the chat as well. Also, everyone, if you can please take a moment, make sure that your Zoom title, when you log in, we'd like to identify who you are. Make sure that your title includes your name, your title, and your community. So the way to do that is to go to your name where you're identified. There is a pop-up box that appears where you can update your information. So go to your name. There's 3 little dots at the top right corner. If you click that, there's an option at the bottom that says rename. So if you can please identify who you are. So that way, when it comes time to the open forum Q&A session, we know who are chiefs and who we can call upon to be able to ask questions. Also, we have several Assembly of First Nations staff in the meeting. They are available to support, and staff will be updating the names that haven't been changed, so they'll help us out. That'll be very valuable during the Q&A session. So if you need help, you can message the meeting host and they'll try their best to help you out. Also, staff will be monitoring the Q&A and they are available to answer any technical questions. So I'm going to take a quick look at the agenda. If I can have IT, please put up the agenda up on the screen. So of course, we do have the agenda. This is the Assembly of First Nations National Virtual Forum on the amended Bill C-5, One Canadian Economy, scheduled for today, of course, July 10th, and it will run from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Just some notes on the format. Again, we will begin with opening remarks from National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Neepanak, and we will have a number of speakers joining us here today. After National Chief, we will start with a technical and a legal update with Jula Fond. Jula Fond, of course, is with MLT Aikens, and Drew will be going over the final amended version of Bill C-5. Following that presentation, we will be hearing from Senator Paul P.J. Prosper on his experiences attempting to introduce amendments in the Senate, of course, and then we will open up with a brief Q&A after that. We'll then go to a different topic, the Privy Council's office with Christian Fox and CERNA Deputy Minister Valerie Gideon. We'll get more details on the meeting happening next week with the Prime Minister in Ottawa. Of course, that's scheduled for July 17th. And we will be following the times, so if there is an opportunity for a quick Q&A for that session as well, but it will be important to follow the agenda, and we will go to the next agenda item after that, which of course is the political panel. And that will be the final presentation. It'll be a political and leadership panel with BC Regional Chief TG. We'll have former National Chief Ovid Mercredi joining us, as well as Ontario Regional Chief Abram Benedict. So following those speakers, we then will open it up for any discussion, statements, questions, or comments from registered First Nations leadership. So of course, we need to make sure that you're identified properly. Again, reminding everyone, if you've just joined, if you can please identify yourself, change your name, your title. The way you do that is click on your icon. There, if you go to your name, there's 3 little dots at the top of the screen, right-hand side. Click that, and there should be an option to rename yourself. If you can please indicate whether you are a chief or a technician or a council member, or and also who you represent. So there will be an option during the Q&A sessions. After the panel, we will have, of course, speakers that may wish to ask questions. The format we'd like to do, just to make sure that everyone has an opportunity, everyone will be given up to 3 minutes to either speak or pose a question. We will have a little timer running. It's at the top of the right-hand side of your screen. So this is just a guide, but if we can be respectful that there may be many people that wish to speak, so if we can follow that 3-minute guideline, please. So you can either, if you have a question or comment, you can do one of two things. You can either hit the raise hand function, and we're trying to juggle many things on the screen, but I will try and follow the order that the hands are raised. The other option is that you can pose your question or your comment in the Q&A feature. So the Q&A icon should be at the bottom of your screen. It's different from the chat box. We do have the chat box disabled for most participants, but once it comes time to ask questions, you can click the Q&A icon, and then you can pose your question or your comment there. So I will be attempting to balance. I'll go back and forth between the hands raised and the Q&A questions and discussions. So a reminder, we will have to wrap up by 3 p.m. So about 5 minutes before 3 p.m. we will close, and we will turn it back to Knowledge Keeper Leonard Weasel Traveler to close this session in a good way. So with that, we'd like to get started. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak. Of course, National Chief Woodhouse-Nepenak was born and raised in Penemotang First Nation, Manitoba. Her ancestor, Chief Richard Woodhouse, was an original signatory to Treaty Number 2. She began her term as National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations on December 7th, 2023, becoming the youngest woman and mother to hold that position. So we'd like to welcome National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak to our session here today. National Chief.
Anin Buju. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm coming to you from the, where am I here? Unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin territory. So thank you so very much for welcoming me here to this forum today. I want to thank our Knowledge Keeper for the opening prayer. Thank you so very much. You know, we're reminded that spiritual guidance of the Creator is so important to begin our day in the right way. And, you know, that's so true this week. And I'm so thankful for that. I also just want to say that the first Assembly of First Nations Chiefs Forum on Bill C-5 that was held on June 16th gave us an important opportunity for leadership to share analysis and concerns on what was then proposed of the Building Canada Act. The June 16th forum was not a consultation exercise with the Crown, but it served as an important space for First Nations leadership to share your perspectives on this issue. We've received positive feedback on the June 16th virtual forum, so we thought that this would be a good time to provide an update to hear your views again. The AFN Assembly of First Nations is holding today's forum to continue the discussion now that Bill C-5 has been amended and has received royal assent. As you know, this now means that Bill C-5 is now law. Some important amendments have been made, but unfortunately not enough. Give me 1 second here, I'm so sorry. I'm having some technical difficulties. I hope you could still see me. So throughout this process, First Nations want, and as you know, this act was pushed through Parliament with no input from rights holders who were quite purposely excluded from appearing before the parliamentary committees examining the bill. And I want to just say we thank the parliamentarians who did try to listen. I especially I lift up Senator Paul Prosper, who made every effort to address the obvious free, prior, and informed consent issue in the substance and process of the bill. I lift him up in a good way, and I thank him for that. While First Nations want and support economic development, it cannot come at the expense of our rights or our responsibility to environmental stewardship. So there's a balance, and we have to make sure we think of that balance. As this hard discussion moves on to the next stage, the honor of the Crown remains at stake. We all have a lot of work ahead of us, including, of course, discussion of strategy for the July 17th summit with the Prime Minister and our annual General Assembly that will take place on September 3, 4, and 5 in Treaty 1 territory. Throughout this process, we have been reminding parliamentarians that the AFN is not a collective rights holder. The voices of rights holders must be heard and respected as founding peoples of this country. And so I know that, I stressed that to the Prime Minister, and I said, you need to meet with our chiefs directly. And I'm glad that he's answered that. And I look forward to all of your discussions to him directly next week. And we'll be there as the AFN to sit and support you. We have also consistently communicated concerns about how little time First Nations chiefs have had to properly review this bill. This bill does not qualify as consultation or meet free, prior, and informed consent standards. And many, we've made sure also that many parliamentarians know that First Nations have a range of views on development. Many chiefs are concerned about Bill C-5, while others have written even to me, and I know to the government, and wanting to proceed quickly with projects and resource revenue sharing agreements. And so as the AFN, we're trying to support every First Nations rights holder, whether they support or oppose this bill. And we have consistently been made the case for closing the First Nations infrastructure gap to be recognized as a project of national significance. The First Nations infrastructure gap has perpetuated deep-rooted inequality in this country, because all Canadians win by fast-tracking the construction of modern schools and housing in First Nations communities. It creates jobs for this country, but this country also has to start fast-tracking clean water systems, all-season road access, and reliable internet service. So let's get on with the meeting today. I know that that's just a short intro. I don't want to take up too much time. I'd rather hear from all of you about next week and how we see that fitting. But I think for sure, where my head's at, it's, we've got a big infrastructure problem. I know that this country doesn't want to talk about the $350 billion of infrastructure gap that exists for First Nations. But when we look at our little kids and they don't have proper schools, or our populations are growing, or we don't have access to internet and cell service in our communities and access to better roads and all that infrastructure that needs to be built. And I keep telling the feds, I'm like, you want to have all these discussions about all these big projects and then maybe you'll get a school? How are we ever going to even trust that? It's been 150 years this way under the Indian Act. And so big discussion to happen next week, chiefs, and I look forward to hearing your views and your thoughts on next steps and your strategy, and we stand with you. So thank you so very much. Let's get on with this meeting. I look forward to seeing many of you next week in Ottawa, and of course at our assembly in September. Look, we don't have an official resolution one way or another on this bill, so I put that to the chiefs. If you want to put one forward for September one way or another, that's your duty, and that's your way if you wish to move forward in that way. So we'll see you next week in Ottawa. For those that I don't see there, hopefully we see you in Treaty 1 territory, September 3, 4, and 5 in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Thank you so very much. Chimigwech.
Chimigwech, thank you so much, National Chief, for opening the session and laying the foundation for the discussion here this afternoon. And of course, a reminder to everyone, this is not consultation. This is not funded by the Government of Canada. This is actually a session being put on by the Assembly of First Nations to make sure that we have a good dialogue and that First Nations can get a better positioning of their positions moving forward regarding this legislation. So actually legislation that is now law. So with that, mindful of the time, I'd like to turn it over to our next presenter, who is Senator Paul P.J. Prosper. And just a very quick recap. I think most of us know Senator Prosper. In 2020, he was elected Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Of course, served in that role until he was appointed to the Senate. Also, Mr. Prosper holds a Bachelor of Laws from Dalhousie University and a Bachelor of Arts from Cape Breton University. So with that, Senator Prosper, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Adam. Speaking to you from Buckingham Mi'kmaq Nation, which is part of our traditional territory of Mi'kma'ki. I'd like to begin by recognizing the Knowledge Keeper, Weasel Traveler, for his prayer and for starting us off in a good way. And I am certainly honored to be here and certainly appreciate this space to provide a Senate perspective on C-5. I would like to begin by recognizing the advocacy of the AFN, the National Chief, and the many First Nation leaders across Turtle Island who have expressed their concerns and perspectives on Bill C-5, the One Canadian Economy Act. And part of that success through the AFN is removing the Indian Act from Schedule 2 of that bill. I want to start off by clearly stating that I am not against development and I am not against progress. We exist as a circle within many circles, a nation within many nations. We are interdependent and interconnected in more ways than we can imagine. When Canada succeeds, we all succeed. And to be clear, I am not immediately opposed to what government does. However, I believe that Indigenous people must take their rightful place in this country. I will always remain steadfast to advancing government initiatives that align with First Nation priorities. In fact, within the past couple of months, I confirmed once again with Indigenous Services Canada that I remain committed to sponsoring First Nations water legislation when it makes its way to the Senate. However, what bothers me is a legislative process that is rushed. Legislation that does not afford parliamentarians and Indigenous people adequate time to consider its potential impact. Legislation that does not uphold the honor of the Crown through adequate and meaningful consultation with Indigenous people. Within the Senate process, I pushed hard to have rights holders at the table to tell their story. In the end, we were only able to get one, and I thank Chief Shelley Moore Frappier, who stepped in on very short notice. Her testimony reflected many of the concerns expressed by other Indigenous leaders across this country. The Senate process undertaken was a pre-study before a forum known as a committee of the whole. It was complicated because you only had the option to be present there in person in the chamber. I did everything to try and improve the bill and to slow it down. Many chiefs expressed the way this bill was quickly moving its way through Parliament, that it was eroding the trust relationship between the chiefs and the federal government. My amendment was focused on making the factors in the decision-making process requirements rather than considerations in Section 6. I also sought to include FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, in those factors in order to create a clear standard that had to be met. While the Constitution guarantees consultation under Section 35, we all know that time and time again, successive governments have fallen short of meaningful consultation. And as a former chief, I know the importance of speaking directly to rights holders. In Nova Scotia, We spelled out a process for consultation with the federal and provincial governments, but even that is not always followed. My amendment was voted down, but I had good support with many of my Senate colleagues who either voted with me or abstained. Frankly, I was quite surprised by that support. I hope this means that a focused, reasoned, and persistent voice will help change minds and hearts. You'll see that there even were some Indigenous people that spoke against the amendment, Indigenous senators, calling us to trust government. But I'm worried about how future governments will use this law. I'm worried about the process being repeated in the future when the next big emergency happens. We can't be cut out again. When this opportunity to speak to you presented itself, I saw it as a chance to engage in a dialogue. You have a full agenda and much to consider, so I don't want to speak much longer. You have excellent technical staff and legal advisors that can speak to the specifics of the act and how it may impact our communities. And unfortunately, I have other commitments, so I'm not able to stay until the discussion portion of this forum. However, my staff are here to listen and follow up. So I'd like to stop here and ask chiefs to consider 3 questions. What message do you want me to take back to Parliament? How do you want to move forward? And what change do you need to see to the consultation process to make it feel meaningful and adequate for you that you have been consulted? I know these are quite the questions, but I think they are questions chiefs have been thinking about for a while. And so I appreciate your guidance, because even though I am a senator, I am always first and foremost Mi'kmaq, and I will never lose sight of that. Willalio, and thank you all.
Miigwech, thank you very much, Senator Prosper. I know on the agenda we have about 4 minutes left, and we recognize that your staff will be staying. Just wondering if you can take 1 or 2 questions within 4 minutes. Okay, so I am going to open it up. If there are any immediate questions, you can hit the raise hand function or go to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Again, very good presentation, Senator Prosper, of course, former regional chief. We do have a question, hand that is raised, so I'm going to turn it over to Chief Kelsey Jacko, Cold Lake First Nation. Chief Jacko, go ahead. If we can have Chief Jacko unmuted, please. We can't hear you yet. I'm going to turn it over to our IT team to have Chief Jacko unmuted. There we go. From my screen, I've lost Chief Jacko. I hope he's still there. I know it looked like he was in a vehicle with a phone. I know I've made
Okay.
sometimes. So there we are. Chief Jacko, go ahead. I don't see Chief Jacko. Sometimes you accidentally hit the hang
Okay,
up.
how about now?
Oh, there you are.
How about now?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just want to know who's going to be all in the meeting on the 17th. Is the Métis the Inuit going to be there? Because we're the true rights holder, and meaningful consultation. I expect the Prime Minister to come to my territory. I asked him pre-election if he's going to come talk about this carbon capture, this big pathways thing, and he said he would, but here I'm going to be chasing him down and asking him questions here on the 17th. So, with true meaningful consultation. I wish he would come to my territory, come meet with my people, come meet with the rights holders. We're having a treaty gathering here at 111th and Sutina, and it just seems like we get ghosted, and we always get the response that they have prior engagements. So to be meaningful, he should make a attempt to come to our territories. So that's all I have to say for now.
Miigwech, Chief Jacko. So Senator Prosper, I'm going to actually defer that to the next presenters, and
Sure.
that will be the discussion on the gathering next week with the Prime Minister. Again, a reminder to everyone, the session next week with the Prime Minister is not being put on by the Assembly of First Nations, and this session here is not consultation. So one more quick one, Chief Edward John. I see your hand raised. Chief John, go ahead. And again, I'm looking to the IT team if we can have Chief John unmuted.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Senator Prosper, for your intervention at the Senate, proposing the amendments on free prior informed consent. I want to suggest to you one of the three questions you raised is what work you would undertake at the Senate. And I would suggest one thing, and would be to take a look at the human rights and freedoms in the Declaration. It doesn't stop at human rights, it stops at human rights and freedoms. It's in the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. These provisions, the right to self-determination in Article 3, the right to free, prior, and informed consent is explicitly mentioned in at least 5 provisions in the Declaration. And provisions from Article 25 to 32, dealing with lands, territories, and resources, come from already existing international law. So the source of these provisions, free, prior, informed consent, comes from existing international law already, the right to self-determination as well. And so the question would be, I mean, I'm aware of it because I was in Geneva as we talked through these, and we had to draw on these international conventions, international treaties, to bring those concepts into the Declaration. And so one of the questions may be the conflict of laws. I think the right to free, prior, and informed consent is good standing law in this country right now, and over and above the duty to consult, that the UN Declaration provides a foundation for Indigenous governments to make decisions about their lands, territories, and resources, and to benefit from it and to protect. So I'm pretty clear about that, and that I think that legal foundation is strong. If it's not mentioned in the C-5 explicitly, those other laws it does not mean the other laws do not apply. So if this matter ends up in the courts, I mean, any lawyer worth his salt or her salt will have to use those court cases that have already decided this. So I would think, and then the other point would be that the issue of reconciliation, as interpreted by the Supreme Court of Canada and is the foundation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, should be determined explicitly that this issue of reconciliation is in the national interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief John. Senator Prosper. Oh, and Senator Prosper, you're still on mute. So if we'll have Senator Prosper unmuted, please. There we go.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Chief. And I can tell you're quite adverse. You're quite seasoned as well in terms of certainly the existing law and its application here within the context of Canada. Certainly, as it relates to FPIC, the intent was to, bring it within the body of the act because, it will give guidance and certain parameters to, the duty to consult, and also to make it quite explicit as being operable within the statute itself, beyond preambles, right in the body of the act itself. So you're quite right, Chief, in itemizing that as a foundation for reconciliation as well. So I thank you for not only your knowledge, but your advocacy as well.
Thank you very much, Senator Prosper. I am aware there are a number of hands raised and some questions in the Q&A box, but it is important that we get on to the next presentation, which will actually respond to some of the questions on the meeting next week with the Prime Minister. So with that, Senator Prosper, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, take care.
So we will, at this point, just a reminder, Chiefs and Leadership Online, we do have the Privy Council office on the agenda for 1 o'clock Eastern time, and we will turn to that. Also aware that there is an opportunity to ask questions again after the panel presentation. So at this point, if we can have the IT team admit our next two guests. Just a reminder, this is a very quick update on the July 17th First Nations leadership meeting with the Prime Minister. We have two guests. Christian Fox is the Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council. As well, we have Valerie Gideon, the CERNA Deputy Minister. So just a reminder again, I will repeat again, as we move into the next agenda item, that this online session is being hosted today by the Assembly of First Nation. It is not consultation on behalf of the government. We want to make sure that's very clear. However, the Assembly of First Nations has invited the next two speakers to give an update on the Prime Minister's meeting next week. So just a quick bio of Christian Fox, who will be presenting. Christian Fox was appointed Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council and the Associate Secretary to the Cabinet effective January 27th, 2024. As of last October 21st, 2024, she is concurrently serving as the Deputy Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Clerk, Christiane served several Deputy Minister roles across public service. She was the Deputy Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada from July 2022 to January 2024, the Deputy Minister of Indigenous Services Canada from September 2020 to July 2022, the Deputy Minister of Intergovernment Affairs from November 2019 to September 2020, and the Deputy Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs and Youth from June 2017 to November 2019. She's also the Deputy Minister Champion of the Federal Youth Network. We will also have Valerie Gideon. Dr. Valerie Gideon is a member of the Mi'kmaq Nation of I'm probably going to mispronounce, and I apologize, Gizgazapig, Quebec, and a proud mother of two girls. Dr. Gideon, I'll get you to clarify proper pronunciation for me. Dr. Gideon currently holds the position of President of the Federal Economic Development Agency for Northern Ontario and Deputy Minister of Crown, Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs. In addition, she is leading the Indigenous Federal Employees Chairs and Champions Circle, as well as championing the work that the Knowledge Circle for Indigenous Inclusion has been leading on accountability for Indigenous employees. She's also continuing to lead efforts to attract Indigenous talent with a particular focus on the senior levels with her PhD in communications. Valerie is also a champion of the communications community. So with that, I turn it over to Christian Fox and Dr. Valerie Gideon.
Thank you very much, and very nice to see many of you. And like Val, who I worked closely with for many years, I'm also the mom of two beautiful girls. So thanks for allowing us a bit of time this afternoon or morning for those of you in the West. First, I'm here in my office on the traditional Algonquin territory. It's a pleasure to live and work on these traditional lands. I do want to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your agenda to just perhaps for us to share a little bit of an update on Bill C-5 and the plans for next week. First, I think many of you are aware of this, but the Building Canada Act received royal assent on June 26th. The bill has two primary components. One, specifically dealing with internal trade barriers between jurisdictions across the country. And the second component dealing with major projects of national interest. And I do want to be clear at the front end of this conversation that this is about priority nation building projects. And for us, that means not only the important work we need to do in consultation, but the opportunity for Indigenous proponents, Indigenous equity partnerships, in addition to our responsibilities around duty to consult. The Prime Minister has made clear that ensuring respect for Indigenous rights and environmental standards are absolutely part of this legislation. The legislation itself will apply to a small number of projects in a particular state of readiness, and it will shift our regulatory focus to build projects of national interest faster. However, proponents must demonstrate that they have done the work to work with Indigenous communities across the country. It will provide a single upfront decision to proceed with the project, but that will be subject to conditions that will be developed via a regulatory process in consultation with Indigenous peoples. And we have committed to a 2-year timeframe for projects with the goal to strengthen our economy. Perhaps we have spoken to some of you. We shared some information with you prior to our tabling, but there were some changes that were done as the bill went through Parliament. There were some amendments that I think will include, in one case, strengthening transparency by requiring public reporting on consultations 60 days after the conditions document is issued. We do know, and in conversation with some of you, that protecting confidential information, including confidential Indigenous knowledge, will have to be taken into account through this transparency requirement. There will also be a 30-day notice before adding a project to Schedule 1 of the Act by publishing the name and the description of such project for 30 days. And so those are a few changes that were done as the bill moved through the House. The key factors for national interest project designation. A project must meet these factors in the context of strengthening our economy. But more specifically, we will look at factors like how a project helps our autonomy, our resiliency, our security. Does it provide economic or other benefits to Canada? Does it have a high likelihood of successful execution? Does it advance the interest of Indigenous peoples and contribute to clean growth? Sorry, there we go. And I think advancing the interest of Indigenous peoples as a factor was a direct result to discussions with Indigenous peoples to build it into the factor. In terms of consultation, the legislation requires consultations throughout the national interest process. So whether a project is designated of national interest through the creation of the conditions doc and on any of the amendments. So there's consultation built, and we will work with Indigenous peoples to ensure that that consultation is robust and aim to secure free, prior, and informed consent for the projects to meet UN DRIP commitments. And the intention of the project-specific consultation is to meet all aspects of the duty to consult, including identifying accommodation measures as appropriate. But I will say that we have a strong desire to work with Indigenous proponents on designing projects, on accessing capacity funding to deliver on those projects, and accessing the loan guarantee program, which has doubled from $5 to $10 billion in order to work together on these projects of national interest. And so some of the processes that you have been familiar with, working on the Impact Assessment Act, working with proponents, the federal government, provincial and territorial governments, the particular context in the North, all of these things will be taken into account as we advance the work through this legislation. And the minister responsible for the ledge will issue a single conditions document. The conditions will be enforceable, and if a proponent does not meet those conditions, we have the ability to remove a project if those conditions are not met. I did want to share, and I think you are all familiar with the fact that we did get an opportunity to hear concerns from Indigenous groups, First Nations groups, around the lack of initial outreach on this initiative. People shared with us that it was too rushed, it was inadequate and not meaningful. And so we are committed to working with you moving forward through conversations we will have next week, but beyond that, so that we can advance projects that are of national interest to First Nations. So your rights, your interests, your perspectives, and your leadership will be critical. So the Prime Minister wants to spend time with you at next week's summit. This will not be the only point of engagement, but it will be an opportunity for you to hear directly from the PM. We've got an agenda that we're working through, which starts on July 16th and goes into a full day meeting with the Prime Minister on the 17th. And then from there, we would like to use the summer and the fall to really go out and speak with you about projects, about process, about maybe more regionally specific things that you'd like to raise with us. We want to work with you on unlocking the $40 million in capacity building. How do we do that effectively? There is a commitment to create an Indigenous Advisory Council to the new Major Projects Office. We want to hear from you about not just mandate, but membership. And so this is an opportunity for us to work together, to hear from you. I think there is a clear desire for the Government of Canada to listen to the views that will be shared next week and beyond. And maybe I'll turn to Valerie Gideon to give a bit more on the logistics of the summit itself, and then we can take a few questions. So Val, over to you.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks very much. And as the Deputy Clerk mentioned, this summit is really intended to bring together the Prime Minister, federal ministers, and First Nations right holders to have this discussion with respect to issues of critical importance on the implementation of the Act. The engagement is really intended to be a dedicated space for First Nations leadership with respect to this particular purpose and objective. It is going to take place at the Canadian Museum of History, which is where I'm currently located in Gatineau, Quebec, on the traditional unceded, unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. We are intending to start on the afternoon of the 16th around 3 o'clock, although as the Deputy Clerk mentioned, we're still refining the agenda, although we understand the critical importance of being able to send that out as soon as possible. It would start with an opening ceremony. We will have some optional sessions, and we're looking at a reception that would be planned for that afternoon for some meet and greet and networking purposes. And then on the 17th, there would be that more substantive day where the Prime Minister would engage in discussions with First Nations right holders. And again, because of the number of individuals that we expect would be in attendance, we want to make sure that this is meaningful dialogue. And so that's why we're spending lots of attention on the agenda itself, so that that can work out and actually be constructive and pragmatic. The invitations were sent out on the 4th of July, and we have further registration details that were sent last night. In-person invitations were extended to all First Nations chiefs across the country, to modern treaty and self-government leaders, to the national chief, regional chiefs, and regional organizations. This is the first time in over a decade that the Prime Minister will be hosting a meeting with all First Nations chiefs across the country. So it's quite a significant event. And we know that the notice has been short, but thankfully we've heard from many of you that you are able to attend, which is great. The in-person attendance is limited to one individual per community, and that again is because of the size of the list of invitees, to make sure that we can accommodate individuals in this space. We will be able to reimburse travel up to a maximum of $5,000 for each individual representative of the nations. And we are going to be sending out details on how to submit travel expense claims separately, so that should come shortly, as well as I mentioned, the agenda itself. We are also hoping to collect questions from participants in advance. That is going to help us to obviously brief the Prime Minister, brief ministers, but also make sure that we are organizing the content that will be presented and discussed in a way that is meaningful and that is relevant to what is top of mind for First Nations leadership. So we're hoping that you will be able to send us some of that information in advance. So that is the core information with respect to the logistics at this time. Je sais qu'on a parlé en anglais, mais bien sûr, si vous avez des questions en français, et toute l'information qu'on va avoir pour le sommet est dans les deux langues officielles, donc disponible en français également. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you both very much, Dr. Gideon and Deputy Clerk Fox from the Privy Council. So we do have a few minutes. We've got about 6 minutes until the next panelists. And I just want to remind everyone, again, I keep saying this, and I just want to make sure it's clear. This is not consultation. This forum is not consultation, but we will open it up for some questions. So be mindful of the comments and the questions that you bring forward, that this is not intended to be consultation. So I do see some in the Q&A. We'll get through as many as we can, but we need to get to the panelists in about 6 minutes. And I cannot see the full name on my screen, but Chief Shana, go ahead. We can have Chief Shana unmuted. Shana Thomas, there we go. Unmuted, please.
And thank you so much for the meeting and for the presentation. Just a logistical question really quickly. I know that the agenda is being worked on, but just wanted to confirm for travel purposes what we can expect in terms of the agenda. I apologize if I missed that part. I did hear you talk about 2 days, but just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think right now the times that we have as tentative to be confirmed, but would be later in the afternoon of the 16th, so likely starting around 3 o'clock Eastern time. Oh, is it 2 o'clock now? It's tentative. Afternoon of the 16th Eastern time, and going into the 17th, starting early in the morning, like around 8 o'clock or so Eastern time in the morning, and then up to around 4 o'clock Eastern time. And again, we are also, obviously, if you're coming into town and you have an interest in meeting with senior officials of departments, even ministers, we are taking all of these requests and we are tracking them and making sure that we find pathways to make it as simple as possible for people to engage in other meetings that would be of interest to them specifically for their nation.
Great. Thank you very much for the question and the response. A reminder to everyone online, this is a Chiefs forum. So we will acknowledge chiefs and registered proxies. So next, I'm going to turn it over to Grand Chief Cody Diabo. Grand Chief Diabo, if we can have IT unmute Grand Chief Diabo, please go ahead with your question.
Sego so Wego, now for being here. On the eager day, Cody Gunner Dio Dibo. Let me turn my camera on. There we go. I just had a couple questions, if you don't mind. So the one you had mentioned that so the session's only open to one member from each community. I mean, obviously myself, I am going, but I do have a technical staff member who would be accompanying me. Would they not be allowed in the session, or is that something that's available? I mean, for obvious purposes, I mean, it's better to have a technical person there taking down notes or anything like that. If I'm trying to engage and different things like that, it's hard to do multiple things at once.
Yeah, so it is intended to be hybrid as well, and we are looking at what kind of capacity we can have from the virtual perspective. Right now, in terms of virtual, for example, we've invited tribal councils and so forth. So, but I think, Grand Chief, I'll take back your request and just see what is possible in terms of the virtual aspect. In person at this point, we're still getting lots of folks registering and coming in, and we want to make sure that we're not exceeding the maximum capacity of the space. So we're keeping to one representative for each rights holder in the room at this point.
Okay. Again, I mean, just a general comment. I know it's not you ladies on the call there, but I guess some of the sentiments is, you know, this also feels a little bit rushed as well. I mean, it's not fully planned out. We're kind of, you know, doing the planning while everything's ready to go for next week and hoping everything's going to work together. So would have liked the engagement stuff happening a little bit prior to have this stuff rather than, well, only one at a time or different things like that. So appreciate that. And then just a question overall. Ms. Fox, you had mentioned about the one aspect of the bill was to remove trade barriers between provinces. I guess so it would be my view anyways, that we don't have those trade barriers between First Nations amongst ourselves and Kahnawake, as well as part of the Iroquois caucus, are opening up our trade routes, and we're open to other First Nations coming on board with that. Is Canada now going to try and get involved in that if we decide we're going to start trading amongst ourselves?
Actually, the objective of the bill, frankly, was for Canada to get out of the way of trade and let whether it's your trade with another community or trade between provinces. So it was a way to look at the movement of goods across the country and ensuring that, you know, if a province or someone has recognized a particular good or service, that we in the government don't need to double certify it. And I think that would be the same for labor mobility. You know, if a person is trained in one jurisdiction, they should be able to work across the country, and that their credentials could be recognized. So that really was the objective of the internal trade component of the bill, was to remove those barriers for the free movement of goods and people.
Great. Thank you very much for the response and the question as well. So I am mindful of the time. We need to transition into the next presenters. We have a panel coming up. I'll throw it back to Dr. Gideon and Christiane Fox for some closing comments. But again, want to make it very clear, this is not consultation. Any comments are not consultation here. But before we do that, there was actually one question earlier. I believe it might have come from Chief Jacko. I don't know if he's still on, but I believe the question was, is this specifically for First Nations? I believe his feeling was that it should be First Nations, not Métis. And I just want to clarify that question. If you
Correct.
That is correct. It is First Nations rights holders.
Okay, very good. Okay, so we need to move on to the next panel. Any closing comments before we do that?
just really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. Au plaisir de
Thank
vous voir.
you. Thank you very much. Merci. Wilaliak.
Great, thank you very much, both. Of course, Christiane Fox is Deputy Clerk of the Privy Council, and Dr. Valerie Gideon joining us for that presentation. Just to let everybody know, they are here just for this part of the agenda, and they will be leaving us and will not be part of the rest of the discussion. Of course, the rest of the discussion being internal and discussions on First Nations strategy, and also preparation so that you can make your own positions clearly moving forward. So miigwech for that. And I just want to confirm that they are logged off and out of the session. So up next, we have a panel, the political leadership considerations of Bill C-5 and the Building Canada Act. As part of the panel, we have 3 individuals making presentations, and then at that point, we will open it up for any Q&A and further discussion for the remainder of this forum. So as part of the panel, we will have Regional Chief TG from British Columbia. We'll have former National Chief Overd Mercredi and Ontario Regional Chief Benedict, as you see on the agenda. So we would like to start with British Columbia Regional Chief TG. Regional Chief TG is a member of the Takla Nation and has dedicated his career to advancing the rights and interests of Indigenous communities. Prior to his current role as the elected Regional Chief of the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, Regional Chief TG served as the elected Tribal Chief of the Carrier-Sekani Tribal Council from 2012 to 2017, and as the CSTC Vice Tribal Chief from 2009 to 2012. Regional Chief Terry TG is deeply involved in natural resource development and the policies that shape it, advocating for sustainable practices that respect Indigenous rights. As Regional Chief, he was an instrumental voice in the development and historic passing of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. That's UNDRIPA. So we now turn it over to Regional Chief TG. And if we can have Regional Chief unmuted, please. If we can have IT, there we go. Go ahead.
Yeah, you didn't need to introduce me like that, Adam. We're just wasting a lot of time because I really want to get discussions to the chiefs in the room, because quite simply, I think it's really important that we hear from the chiefs in terms of our position from the Assembly of First Nations, and for myself, my region. As Adam introduced me, I'm Regional Chief for the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations. Just want to acknowledge the territory. I'm calling from the Okanagan Silex people in West Bank First Nations, and say thank you, Masicho, for allowing us in the territory. I do have some slides. I'm not sure if the technicians can put it up. Next slide. Certainly, the truth of the matter is that Bill C-5 is totally in opposition of where we're at in terms of the commitments that we heard from this federal government. It's reconciliation in reverse in Canada to use this existential crisis, if you will, on the national interest as a reason to justify infringe on our Aboriginal and treaty rights. Certainly is, as we heard, I would say from PJ Prosper, that the parliamentary process with this idea of existential threats of the US tariffs and fear-mongering the general public has really created this legislation and sped up the process in terms of seeing this legislation gain royal assent. The symbolic deadlines of Canada Day, so the bill could be amended, and the House of Senate not adequately debating nor allowing certainly amendments, as PJ shared, certainly is kind of sounds very similar to what's happening south of the border with Trump's big beautiful bill. And that's a problem with some of these bills, such as C-5, is that it's kind of like an omnibus bill where they throw everything in it. We've gone through we've gone through the very similar process here in British Columbia with C-14 and 15. That was all encompassing in terms of legislation and really bypassing the province of BC, using this crisis as well as an argument to allow the sped up process of developing bills to be passed. And not only is it fast tracking the development of the bill, but it's a fast tracking legislation for fast tracking projects, which is potentially going to reverse the issues that the province of BC and perhaps the government of Canada will see from many First Nations, and particularly those First Nations that did not give their consent to some of these projects. Certainly, we saw Minister Carney, or our Prime Minister Carney, surround himself with Indigenous parliamentarians, while the mechanism to undermine their own rights is at stake. Namely that, by protecting himself and perhaps allowing many of our own people who are members of Parliament now and are in position of these very influential positions, such as ministers, really gives a facade that there is going to be perhaps a place that this legislation will, I suppose, gain support from First Nations. With the Prime Minister already at the Calgary Stampede suggesting that an oil pipeline through BC, we've gone down this road before here in British Columbia, and certainly there are other issues to deal with, in particular Bill C-69, the anti-tanker bill on the north coast of British Columbia, as well as really living up to the declaration is certainly the other test that we are really upholding here in British Columbia. Yet the province and Canada continues to really push forward a position in terms of these legislation to bypass the provisions of the declaration. With the Attorney General already suggesting that national interest is no veto, and national media signing off on this opinion is certainly a sign of the times. One of the things that we really have to better understand is some of the wording, the lexicon that's being thrown around. So what is certainly a definition of what a national interest project is? Next slide. Certainly our ancestors and those that have been in this fight for far too long, we do certainly demand that our rights are being upheld. In a time of reconciliation in reverse, and always our nations will rise up and I would say fight against some of these issues that we need to deal with in terms of legislation bypassing not only deep consultation, but also consent provisions that's upheld in the United Nations Declaration Act. Certainly our nations and our communities and our ancestors demanded we need to uphold our rights, our treaty rights, our title to these lands that have been hard fought for many decades. Certainly the heavy lifting of the Constitution and force of the Crown, to be honest, I wondered, what more can I say that is different? Where do we go from here? Really, I think everything I've stated from the issues of Bill C-14 and 15 here in BC, and now C-5. Certainly shared the last time I was here presenting, and no point in repeating those. But I think, going ahead, what do we do now? What are the key ideas or thoughts that I can share that might help us in next week's meeting with Prime Minister Carney and also the Privy Council? And most importantly, what can I say to ensure that the Prime Minister and PCO don't just talk at us with implementation updates, and we bring our own solutions to the table now that Bill C-5 has made royal assent and is law. Next slide. First, I should also preface this comment that I am as part of the Assembly of First Nations, the chair of the Chiefs Committee on the United Nations Declaration Act. And we're working on the implementation, working on with the Government of Canada, in particular, implementation of the action plan measures, the APMs that's within the National Action Plan. First, free, prior, and informed consent is a precondition and material requirement for our access and application to any major project, or the project cannot bypass environmental assessments and other environmental laws, including what has been brought up by many NGOs is bypassing the issues of the environment and species at risk. Second, defining what is the national interest is a national, regional, and First Nation specific requirement. So really, what is a national interest project, and why would this qualify as a national interest project? That needs to be better defined and understood. There is no, as far as I know, no legal definition of a national interest project. Third, the constitutional requirement to consult, accommodate, and achieve consent must occur at every stage of implementation of Bill 5, not after the fact. And certainly, sadly, we're coming to this place where it has reached royal assent, but I think perhaps maybe there is provisions in the future to make amendments to Bill 5. We did attempt that here in the province of BC with 14 and 15, where we brought a recommendation, and many others brought recommendations forward to split some of the bills to what is a private project versus a public project. Certainly, we there's roads, highways, and public projects such as schools and hospitals. We're not against those types of projects, and then I think National Chiefs has it right. There are many projects in our communities. The $350 billion shortfall in terms of infrastructure in our communities. Those should be, I would say, those are national interest projects. Reversing the issues of safe drinking water is a national interest project to all First Nations across this country. Fourth, the permanent role of First Nation must be structured in the new federal major projects office. We need to be at that office. We need to define what those parameters are in terms of reference, if you will, in terms of the major projects office. Fifth, determining what is consent must uplift our inherent self-determination, recognize our rights, our self-government, and our own laws and legal orders. If many First Nations out there have their Indigenous governing bodies and they're ready to make decisions, those need to be upheld in terms of how decisions are made on major projects. Next slide. Free, prior, and informed FPIC. The requirement of consent is from our own jurisdiction, not the common law, not under Miranda. First Nations legal orders require our consent. Approval, and that right is continuous and, of course, can be withdrawn. And certainly there's an ability for our First Nations to say yes or no on a project. That has been hard fought in many of these court cases. And certainly free, prior, and informed consent needs to be upheld. C-5 must have FPIC as a requirement. Free, prior, informed consent, it's not merely consultation. The C word in this context is consent. It must affirm our legal jurisdictional right to say yes or no. Really our ability to govern ourselves in our own affairs, perhaps have our own environmental assessment that is upheld in terms of what are the requirements for a project to go through our territories. FPIC must occur before national interest is determined. FPIC must be a standard of consultation for directly affected First Nations. And I think, you know, the United Nations Declaration Act is their law. It's their legislation. It needs to be upheld. The federal government needs to follow its own laws. Next slide. Certainly, national interest is of interest to us. Of national interest, it is obvious that this is a supercharged term that puts Canada's interests before our interests. If there is a national interest project, it shouldn't come at the cost of our First Nations rights, title, and interests, nor our treaty rights. And that's really important to uphold. And this is where we're at in terms of where we're discussing what does all this mean in this legislation of C-5. Certainly this term is being utilized in our determination, I suppose, to undermine and weaken our rights, that everyone's rights as a Canadian citizen should be upheld, and certainly trampling over our rights, title, and interests. And that weakness can be turned to our greatest strength if we are co-drafters of what a national interest definition is. I would say a national interest would be safe drinking water. I would say national interest is the implementation of you know, reducing the gap of the infrastructure of many First Nations communities in this country. As constitutional partners, we must agree on what is of national interest. And certainly upholding our title rights and treaty rights is in Canada's interests. Next slide. Consult, accommodate, and consent are at every stage. First Nations must be directly involved in the co-drafting of the policy, administrative, and possible regulatory materials that interpret what is in the national interest. Certainly, we need to be part of these discussions and definitions. The mechanisms of delivering compliance with common law for uplifting our legal orders and ensuring consent must be co-developed. Certainly, we've seen this is one of the commitments that is within the National Action Plan, some of the action plan measures. That was supposed to be, should be upheld in agreement with many First Nations across this country that have been involved in terms of the implementation of the United Nations Declaration Act. Next slide. Federal major projects, often we need to co-develop what is the MPO framework, terms of reference, and what have you, in terms of what this office is required to do. And I think that's really important in terms of really being proactive in terms of the place we're at right now. Not all projects are going to be approved, but at some point we need to have some sort of dispute resolution, and certainly have a guide to have a dispute resolution where if we have some sort of dispute in terms of how decisions are made, perhaps. There needs to be a roster of Indigenous experts to advise the Major Projects Office, a wide variety of environmental, socioeconomic, engineering, perhaps, construction, legal, and other Indigenous specific issues really need to be involved and influential in an office such as a Major Projects Office. Next slide. Consent pursuant to our law. Consent is a fundamental expression of our own jurisdiction. It's not merely the checkbox and the duty to consult, it is uplifting our legal orders. Certainly, the United Nations Declaration Act isn't creating new laws or new recognition of rights for First Nations. Those already existed, have already been there, and this needs to be upheld. Rather, UNDA is for the federal government and how they work with our First Nations peoples in terms of getting some consent provisions of perhaps major projects. Laws vary by nation, but all demand consent. We have many legal orders and many different ways of making decisions as Indigenous governing bodies. and those need to be upheld and recognized. Canada must fund the rapid development of these legal systems, as in the implementation of the United Nations Declaration Act, and perhaps even the implementation of action plan measures within the APMs of the National Action Plan. This needs to be adequately resourced and perhaps committed to, and moreover, in terms of the United Nations Declaration Act, how there needs to be a whole of government in terms of implementation of aligning many of the colonial laws with the declaration. Next slide. Certainly calls to action. You know, Bill C-5 is law, but our work is just beginning. We cannot allow this legislation to become another tool of colonization disguised as nation building. This can't happen at the backs of our people, of our rights, our treaty rights, and our inherent rights, everything that we fought for, not only Supreme Court of Canada, but for what all our First Nations have fought for, and in recognition of our rights, title, and interests. The next week's meeting with Prime Minister Carney, we must arrive with, I would say, a strategy, perhaps demands for meaningful partnership and co-development, and that Canada invest in our capacity to exercise our sovereignty and jurisdiction, self-determination, at the pace this legislation requires. Certainly, I think if we're being involved in this legislation, then it needs to be properly resourced. Legal and policy solutions grounded in our laws, in our governing bodies, and how we see in terms of how we make decisions in terms of especially projects that have long-lasting effects. The Trump administration will be around for another 3.5 years, but some of these projects will have long-lasting effects, long beyond 4 years. So we need to be really careful on how decisions are made, and certainly our people demand that. We go united in our demand with that our consent rooted in our legal orders be the foundation of any national interest determination. And certainly that is important to uphold that this is foundational in terms of recognition of sovereignty and self-determination. Next slide. Thank you. I'll end it there, but certainly we received recommendations, and I certainly hope that some of you raise your hands and provide that. I know Grand Chief Edward John, who's well versed in the United Nations Declaration, has provided very substantial and practical solutions, and I think those are important that we come together in terms of finding ways and solutions ahead for next week. Certainly, having the meeting in Gatineau is a little bit of a logistical nightmare for my office, I would say, because we wanted to have some rooms and perhaps maybe some side rooms, but there's limited spaces in Gatineau. But we'll do our best to try to find room for some of our chiefs from British Columbia. But anyways, we'll do our best, and certainly we'll, as a region of BC, we'll caucus before the meeting at on the 17th, perhaps on the 15th virtually. I would encourage other regions to do the same. But anyways, thank you, Adam, and I'll leave it at that and look forward to our meeting next week as we all gather and come up with solutions in terms of best way forward. Thank you, Masicho.
Great. Thank you very much, Miigwech, Regional Chief. Of course, you'll be standing by. We are hoping to have some questions after the session. Okay, Miigwech, thank you. So, of course, reminder, I know some chiefs are just logging in. We are currently in a panel. It's a 3-person panel dealing with political and leadership considerations of Bill C-5, of course, the Building Canada Act. So next, we turn to our next panelist, who is Ovid Mercredi. And again, no introduction needed, but just, of course, to be aware that former National Chief Ovid Mercredi is a distinguished Cree lawyer, author, and political leader who has worked tirelessly to advance First Nation rights. He served as National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations from 1991 to 1997, during which time he played a key role in constitutional negotiations and worked to advance the rights and sovereignty of First Nations people across Canada. Following his leadership, Ovid Mercredi returned to his community and served as chief of the Mississipaustick Cree Nation from 2005 to 2011. He also served as president of the Manitoba New Democratic Party from 2015 to 2017. So with that, I'm going to ask IT if you can please unmute Ovid Mercredi, and Ovid, we turn it over to you. About 15 minutes.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to first say to the leaders who will be meeting the Prime Minister that you come there as sovereign people, that you come strong and confident, and you don't compromise your people's rights. This bill that we're dealing with right now is not necessary. You can have major projects to respond to the threat that people within Canada feel with the tariffs and with the president in the South. This is a bad decision by the Prime Minister to short circuit the need to protect the land, the earth itself, and to trample on our people's rights, and to reduce our rights to consultation. Our rights are not about consultation. They supersede the country. Not only that, there are pre-existing rights to the Constitution of this country. We still own this land. We still own this land. It was stolen from us as early back as 1670, when King Charles II gave Robert's land to his relative, which became part of the Hudson Bay Company operations. And what Canadians don't know is this, that the British Parliament created an act to transfer that stolen land to Canada, even before they came to talk to us for Treaty 1 right down to 11. And I remember those constitutional talks, as you refer to there, Mr. Chair, listening to Mr. Gosnell telling the Prime Minister, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, we own this land, lock, stock, and barrel. We do own this land. And I think Canadians need to suffer a little bit. Just to get a sense of what we have experienced as a people since the formation of this country. The fear that they have of losing their wealth that they never shared with us is real for them. I know that. But also, they can afford 3.5 years of suffering. they can curtail their spending, whatever they have to do to save money, to maintain their house, their businesses, and so on. But they don't have to use the excuse of a president down south as a reason for curtailing any interest that we have as a people. It's time, I think, also for the country to think very deeply about how they have impoverished us. In Alberta alone, in one region alone, Treaty 8 area, a study was done recently about how much wealth was generated for that province through extraction of resources that belong to our people as First Nations. It's in the trillions. None of that was shared with us. So when the Prime Minister meets with our leaders, you should account for that. You should make a very clear statement about how he intends to modify the wealth distribution of this country. How he intends to make sure that we share from that wealth generation that's happened since the formation of this country. This is not a time for our leaders to be timid. It's not a time for our people to be cooperative either. And most of all, it's not a time for us to surrender everything. No, it's not a time to capitulate. And when you look at what I just said about the wealth of this country, it's so obvious that the quality of life is there. And that's what they want to preserve. And the tariffs are driving the Canadian politicians crazy, where they can't think clearly about how to respond to a sitting president that's not going to be there for my lifetime or anybody's lifetime. We don't need this legislation, as I said, to have major projects. And the other thing that I think our leaders need to be wary about is not to be tempted by the low-hanging fruit that would come from major projects, like jobs or contracts. We are the owners of that land. We should be the owners of any project. And no project should proceed without the owner's consent. That is what we have to do. And that is what we have to look forward to. How honest will the Prime Minister be to our leaders? Is he going to disclose his own conversations with the Premier of Alberta and all the premiers in the country? His conversations with the leaders down south in the United States? Will he tell us what Ford is thinking, what the Premier of Ontario, Alberta is thinking of doing? How honest are they going to be to us? Or I am certain, and you just need common sense to be that certain, that they already have in mind certain projects that they want to develop. But they need to share that with us. They need to tell us. They need to be honest. Here, for example, in Manitoba, what's the plan? What's the priority? Is it some kind of a corridor, some magic corridor that comes from Alberta, crosses Saskatchewan and ends up in Churchill? What's the plan? And what's going to move in that corridor? Is it oil, wheat, or potash? What's the plan? They know already what they have in mind. The Prime Minister has to be very, very honest with us when he meets with our leaders. He can't hide. And the other thing, the honor of the crown. Where is the honor of the crown? Is it some kind of a joke that it's only used to appease us as a people? That it's a meaningless slogan like reconciliation? The honor of the crown should mean honoring our treaties, for one thing. This September, Treaty 5 will be 150 years old. That is a treaty my ancestors signed. It has never been honored by the Crown. It has never been implemented by Canada. And it has always been ignored by the province. What's the Prime Minister going to say about that? What is he going to do to protect the honor of the Crown and to ensure our treaties are respected and implemented? And we should not get excited because we have a meeting with the Prime Minister. We've been asking for these meetings collectively for a long time. And the only time in the life of this country that we had a venue as a people to talk nation to nation with this country was during the constitutional discussions, which remain unfinished business. And the earth itself, I have heard from our sacred people, our spiritual people. They believe the earth is a spirit. They have a spirit. But if you look at the development across this country, and here in Manitoba in particular, with hydro development, those people had no respect for Mother Earth. So will these major projects be with that same value of non-respect for the earth? I don't know. But the Prime Minister needs to tell us how he intends to make sure that the environment is protected. Because clearly, the message we're getting right now with the fast track process is that respect there is lacking. But for us, we too, we have to stand up. We have to protect the land and the water. And no one should feel obligated to hold the hand of Canada for development. No one should feel obligated to do that until this country shares the wealth that they have accumulated from our lands and resources in the last 150 years plus. There is no reason for our people to suffer anymore. The only reason why we have homelessness, why we have suffering with addictions, why we have such a high unemployment, and why we have no economy, is because the country has refused to share the wealth with us. And yet they play this game annually of health transfers between themselves, between the federal government and the provinces, and transfer payments, equalization payments, a system not just to keep them afloat, a system to keep them in power. And in the meantime, when they think about us, they send us a little bit of money and never enough. The Prime Minister has to make it very clear to us how he intends to change that. What is he going to do to make sure that every government, every First Nations government, has the resources it needs to provide infrastructure for their people, schools for their people, full housing for all their people, on and off reserve. This is what we need to hear from him. Not about how they're going to trick, how they're going to work around the tariffs, and how they're going to maintain their quality of life, their standard of life, on our lands, on our resources, without our consent and without our full benefit. It is difficult, I think, for any leader who has seen the damage of development in our communities to have faith in proponents. Who are these proponents that will be given this power by the country, by the Prime Minister and his cabinet to implement a major project in a national interest? Who are they? We don't know that, do we? Because that information is not shared with us. And the Prime Minister needs to make it very clear when he meets with our leaders who the potential proponents might be. And we need to examine as leaders how these proponents, whoever they are, have treated our people in the past. Because we don't want to go to bed with someone that discriminates against us. And we certainly don't want to join forces with a proponent that disregards our treaties and our Aboriginal title. Maaga Skamina Giskasin. But sometimes I remember what our parents told us about this country. Papeetak, to be gentle. To be gentle. But in the face of all the damage that we experienced, it's very hard to be gentle. And our people, they will rise up. When they feel any sense of injustice, they will rise up. And when that happens, the Prime Minister has to promise not to use the army and the police against our people. Because that has been our experience. State violence against our people. So I have not much more to say because I'm not one of the leaders anymore. But I want to encourage our leaders to arrive in Ottawa in their traditional regalia, in their traditional clothing, and to show a show of strength, and to stand united, and never to capitulate to a major project of national interest without their consent and their full benefit. That is all I will say.
Miigwech, Ovid, Kananaskamatin for your presentation. Thank you very much. And of course, just a reminder to those chiefs just joining, we are currently in a leadership panel, and we have one more panelist, at which point we will open it up for discussion from this group. So next, I would like to call upon Ontario Regional Chief Abram Benedict. And just for everyone to be aware, Regional Chief Benedict doesn't need an introduction, but I will give you a little bit of a background. Of course, Abram Benedict is currently the Ontario Regional Chief for the Chiefs of Ontario. Regional Chief Benedict was elected to a 3-year term in June of 2024, and he advocates, supports, and lobbies for all 133 First Nations in Ontario. Regional Chief Benedict is the first Haudenosaunee person to hold the position of Ontario Regional Chief, and Regional Chief Benedict prioritizes mining, additions to reserve, asserting First Nation rights, and relationship building. In addition to his regional priorities, the Chiefs in Assembly provide the Ontario Regional Chief and the Chiefs of Ontario with mandates and directives that form part of the many of responsibilities. Regional Chief Abram has spent the last 19 years in community leadership, first elected as a district chief for the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne in 2006, and later elected the Grand Chief in 2015. As the Grand Chief for Akwesasne, Abram has led several successful negotiations, including 2 significant land claims that will help advance Akwesasne's priorities and proceeds over $280 million. So with that, Ontario Regional Chief Abram Benedict, go ahead.
Segal, miigwech Adam for the introduction, and good afternoon to all of you, and thank you to the Assembly First Nations for the invite to speak today about this important subject that we have been talking about for a couple weeks now, and leading into the meeting with the rights holders and the Prime Minister and members of his cabinet next week. So I wanted to share a bit of information about the Chiefs Ontario and what has happened in our region, Ontario, with respect to Bill 5. And so we know that in April, around April 17th of 2015, this year, following the Ford government's re-election in Ontario, the government introduced legislation which essentially was protecting Ontario by unleashing our Economies Act, and essentially moving towards getting access to resources in our in our territories. And so the process that we knew, well, we hadn't known this was coming, but we knew this was coming because during the election campaign, which very similarly we've seen during the election campaign of the Carney government, the federal election, the government talk about, the importance of the economy. We've seen the United States and the tariffs and the impact that that's had to the economy abroad. And I do want to acknowledge, the words that former National Chief McCready spoke of, and how, this is the Canadian economy, not our economy. And, this is really, these actions are about protecting and keeping, really keeping their status quo of luxury, and which is definitely off the resources of our people, and, violations of treaties in so many aspects. And so Ontario introduced Bill 5 on April 17th and moved quickly with it. And essentially, Bill 5 changes a number of pieces of legislation in Ontario that are environmental protection rules that the government must follow. And we would argue that already these rules in our region were already pretty lax and have been watered down over the years in the name of development or housing development, which we'll recall, prior to the tariff situation, housing was a big push and still continues to be a push. And oddly enough, our people have suffered from overcrowding and inadequate housing for sadly decades. And Canada as a whole has only seen what our people have seen for a very long time. And so, over the years, environmental protection laws at the provincial level, at least in Ontario, have been watered down. And so, this legislation of Bill 5 changed a number of those legislations, essentially paving the way for the government to do development and not have to abide by rules. And frankly, the Bill 5 gives the government the ability, what they classify as special economic zones, in zones in which they can basically say, we're going to build a project here, and we're going to do anything and everything we want to get that done. And that's sidestepping all environmental, regulatory, provincial regulations, laws, including municipal. And I think that that's important as well, because while the municipalities are creatures of the province, they also have a role in protecting the non-Indigenous communities in which they are elected and served by. And so the Bill 5 was introduced, and the process, for all intents and purposes, was an expedited process. And in fact, the bill was passed within about 53 calendar days. That the bill from introduction to receiving royal assent in Ontario. And the government minimized the number of presentations that were made into their committees and what have you. And really, our message around to the broader Canadian public has been that people should be concerned about governments using expedited processes to achieve their objectives, and in this case is extraction of resources and to quote unquote protect the economy. And frankly, they really are using the situation with the tariffs as a reason why they need to expedite these projects and protect Canada. And subsequently, we've seen the federal government do the same under C-5, in which we've been talking about for several weeks now, and we push hard back on that. Sadly, the federal government enacted, C-5 from June, introduced it at June 6th to July 1st. So 25 days, half of the time that it took Ontario to do it. And Ontario, was at that point was going really fast as well. And so, part of our messaging around this has been, more broadly is people ought to be concerned about the democratic processes and checks and balances that government is using, and to see that Ontario and Canada have used such quick processes and limited the input from folks who are interested in clearly not considering, in our case, the rights holders and consulting with communities directly impacted by that will be directly impacted by projects. And so, as we know that under colonial law, government doesn't have to consult with First Nations prior to introducing legislation, which is fundamentally wrong. But it doesn't, it is problematic because we have, the United Nations Declaration Rights of Indigenous People legislation is in place. We have, the commitment from the Crown of working with the First Nations and the relationship. So through reconciliation, we have the TRC that talks about the relationship, the Royal Commission. So we have lots of conventions why the government should be working closer with First Nations and not taking a colonial process that they've always used. And this is what we think is in the best interest of the communities, that First Nation communities. And so the zero consultation with community, and subsequently the playbook in Ontario has been very similar to what we have seen now with the federal government, is that, we'll consult after the fact, and I think that has been, our message has been clear that's not acceptable. And frankly, it's inadequate, it's shameful and disrespectful, and is not anything closely aligned with honor of the Crown, in which, or any of the treaties that have been signed for, the occupations and resources. The consultation after the fact is not aligned with any of that. And, we have been very clear to the government that that's not acceptable. the other aspect around the Bill 5 and through our messaging, and these sadly, what we've seen in Ontario, and I know that other regions very similarly, I mean, it's these approaches are very undermining of First Nation jurisdiction and sovereignty. The sovereignty of our nations is paramount in the rights of our communities. And I have been very clear with both levels of government that as a regional chief, I'm not a rights holder. And I advocate and support the 133 First Nations in my region, but they are the rights holders. And the government needs to be speaking directly with the rights holders. And we have written the Premier, the Prime Minister. I've also communicated that directly to the Premier of Ontario that the rights holders must be heard directly, and the Chiefs of Ontario is not a one-stop shop for consultation, and we'll continue to maintain that position because the inherent jurisdiction that our people have is with community and the leadership in which they select, not with regional organizations. And so that, Bill 5, again, we're messaging, we've been aligning with other organizations. In fact, I did a presentation last night to Ontario Nature, obviously an organization who's concerned about environmental protections, just sharing the information. They're asking how they can support First Nation voices. And, I was talking about these several points around process that people ought to be concerned about process, consultation, zero consultation going forward after the fact is not acceptable, and frankly is very disrespectful, undermines the First Nation jurisdiction that every First Nation has across Turtle Island, and the impacts of the changes to the environmental protection laws that were already laxed is deeply concerning. And so we have let them. That's the information we have been sharing in our region. We've also met with the Ontario Auditor General, who does, sadly, as a after the fact, but also as an organization that we have been sharing information with, and to look at whether or not the government has failed in its own processes that are established. And so our call out to people who are supporting us is that once these projects start becoming operationalized in the region through the special economic zones, we're going to need support at that point. That's when we'll see judicial reviews. We do know that we have a number of communities already looking at what some options or what court options could be at this point. We're continuing to support that. Our region is bringing together a number of First Nation experts around law, constitution, rights, to bring a think tank so that we can help support some of our regional court challenges, or at least have a bit of a framework for our communities to consider as we go forward. And the last point that I want to share, and through our messaging to Ontario and will be to the federal government, and this is around community jurisdiction and sovereignty. And we have a number of communities that have developed their own community laws, whether it be consultation laws, environmental laws, land laws, and those laws are paramount, and those will continue to exist regardless of the fact that Ontario thinks that they can sidestep and not have laws applicable to them in doing project development. Definitely will not be the case. I can tell you that as the Ontario Regional Chief, every community law that protects the community's jurisdiction and the resources within that community, we will be putting forth to the governments, to the courts, that these laws are paramount based on the inherent jurisdiction of the First Nations in our region. And so that's in a few minutes the work that we have been doing. I know that this forum is around C-5, but Bill 5 very similar in our region, and very detrimental, potentially detrimental actions can be taken in the name of national projects, which we're very against. And our chiefs in assembly have passed a resolution giving my regional office and our secretariat's direction on where we'll be going, and rejecting Bill 5, and also calling for the coordination of a number of activities as I've described to you this afternoon. So, Adam, I think that's my snippet on the work that we're doing in our region, but I know there'll be a question and answer later on that I can definitely share a bit more at that point. So, we'll go.
Great. Thank you very much, Ontario Regional Chief Abram Benedict. Of course, that concludes our panel discussion, our political panel discussion, starting with British Columbia Regional Chief Terry Teegee, and then, of course, we had former National Chief Ovid McCurdy as well. So at this point, we have about 30 minutes or so. We had scheduled until 3 o'clock, but of course, it'll be very important to close in a good way. We'll take the last 5 minutes with our knowledge keeper to close in prayer. So we would like to open it up for discussion. So just a reminder, chiefs and those online, this is a chiefs forum. So it is open to chiefs and official proxies. Just a reminder of how we are going to do this. You can do one of two things. You can either raise your hand, hit the raise hand function, and I'll try and monitor the order that people have raised their hands. Also, if you do not wish to speak, there is the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So just go to the bottom, there's a Q&A icon, click on that, and then you can type in your comment or question. Reminder though, this is a Chiefs forum. So chiefs or proxies, also, chiefs, if you can please identify yourself. Not everybody is properly identified. So the way you do that, you go to your profile, just hover over, take your cursor, and there should be 3 dots that pop up on the upper right-hand corner. Click on that. There's an option at the bottom. Just scroll down. It says rename. So if you are a chief, if you can please identify yourself as a chief. So we'll open it up. Proxy Byron Lewis. Proxy Lewis, if we can have IT unmute Proxy Lewis, please. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and to the speakers, previous speakers on the panel. And there's never been truer words spoken. I think everyone's heard me over the years talk about the need for us to actually qualify and quantify our Aboriginal rights. And now there's never been a time more important, because what we're talking about is values that are in the billions of dollars. You look at Treaty 9 that launched a lawsuit close to $95 billion for impacts. You also look at the Yahi decision that was the Blueberry decision was all about, justification of infringement and government's failure, the Crown's failure to justify that infringement. But we really need to start looking at some of these when they're talking about, what was said, of national interest, and that's to justifiably infringe on our Aboriginal right. But regardless of what they say, they do not have the right to extinguish, and especially under Section 92. And Section 92 is that they may infringe upon Aboriginal right, but they must justify that infringement. And provinces do not have the constitutional authority to extinguish a right. Yet in British Columbia and other cases, they are the leads of that extinguish. We have 6 subpopulations of mountain caribou that are now extinct. We have 13 of the 14 Chinook stocks in the province that are in the requirements for threatened. And just before I run out of time, I think that's one of the things that we need to do is look at the reclamations, sureties, securities or bonds. And what it says in there that in British Columbia, they are under the chief inspector of mines that makes that determination, and to safeguard the environment, public safety, public interest, cultural heritage resources, mines in BC are required to post reclamation security. But it's not us that's determined what that security is and what it needs to protect our rights, because they talk about the forms of reclamation security, security liability, and estimates for major mines and reclamation liability for regional mines. We have to be the ones that are to determine what the amounts of these reclamation bonds are. And I don't think we have, but we need to get on that immediately, because if we don't, we run a risk of these not being affected. Look at Mount Polly, look at what's happening in some of these other cases, especially in, with salmon stocks, and, the early stewards and that. What happens if there's a spill on any of these major rivers or effects to boreal or barren ground caribou, etc.? I'll let it go at that. Thank you again.
Miigwech, Proxy Byron Lewis for that. I don't think it's a specific question, but very strong direction. Reminder, chiefs, we still have Drew Lafond is on, is ready to take questions as well. Also, we had the presentation from Senator Prosper. His staff are available and they are taking notes as well with some of the feedback. Also, a reminder, we have quite a few hands raised, so we're trying to be respectful that other people want to speak. So we have a 3-minute timer that's running. You'll notice it at the top right-hand side of your screen, if you can be respectful of that. Next, we turn to Chief Laurie Carr. If we can have IT unmute Chief Carr, please. Go ahead, Chief Carr.
Ani Tiktodam, Jajaktodam, Megazekwe Dishnakas, Lori Noswin, Michisagi, Anishinaabe, and Dow. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori, and I am Chief for Hiawatha First Nation in Ontario. I do have a couple comments, miigwech for the presentations today, and our Regional Chief Benedict did report on Bill 5, but my comments and or questions come into that relationship between the bills. I know they're BC, I think it was Bill 14 or 15 that they have. How are those two meshing together legally? I know that the feds are always wanting to put things down to the province. We have to go to the province. So with Bill 5 in Ontario, it talks about the environment, species at risk. All of those are being lessened to cut that red tape. But I also want to note one thing I haven't heard yet, and I think it's really important, is archaeology. They are lessening that in Ontario also. So meaning that's how our history, that's part of how our history is found, our ancestors, our way of living is through, because we didn't have cemeteries. So I really want to caution moving forward what's happening in that area too. And we are just finding, not just finding, they're being recovered. Our ancestors are rising here, and we need to take care of that, and we need to see what that looks like and how that we work with that. So that was my one part of raising that. And then last night on the news, and I don't know where I heard it, but I had read it, and was that in Ontario, Ford is also asking the ministries or the ministers to find ways, and he's given them like 30 days, I believe, to how much further they can cut the red tape in their areas, in their ministries. So I really want to be very cautious of this, but also ask in the legal, that work be done, and how, and so in British Columbia and Ontario, and those bills that are coming provincially, how are they meshing together? I need to understand that better, and from that legal standpoint, and I'll stop there because I'm going to start rambling, but miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, Chief Carr. I just want to clarify, who's the question directed to? Oh, if we can have Chief Carr unmuted again, please. IT, if we can have Chief Carr unmuted. She just spoke. And if we can have you click the unmute button as well, Chief Carr. There we go.
I think comments are directed at all of us, for all of us, but also for the legal on the call is, how do those bills interact with each other for us to have that knowledge and that information from a legal perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, Chief Carr. So that would be Drew Lafond. But what I will do is I'll take 3 speakers at a time, and then I will turn for responses. So I'll go to the next speaker first, and then I will turn it over to Legal Counsel Drew Lafond. Chief Marcel Head, Shoal Lake. If I can have IT unmute, Chief Marcel Head, please. And Chief Head, if you can go ahead. And I'm just noticing you're still on mute from our end. It looks like it is a room, large delegation in the room, but you are now unmuted. So go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Chief Marcel Head from Shoal Lake Cree Nation. I just want to make a general statement as to as it pertains to the meeting with the Prime Minister next week. At the last assembly, in the last few assemblies, I've been talking about, the fact, that Shoal Lake Cree Nation is already in the process of participating in our province, I guess, Saskatchewan economy. And we've done so much work, and we're trying to lead, a way, in a process, I guess, that's going to be very meaningful to our people within a defined traditional territory. The one message that we carry is that governments, need to understand that we never gave up the land, we never gave up the resources within our traditional territory. As a matter of fact, way before European contact, we exercised our sovereignty and jurisdiction over the lands, the waters, and we had a sort of an economy, to exercise. We did trade, way before the newcomer. That was part of the economy, and that is something that we need to make sure that these governments that are introducing legislation both federally and provincially. I think that they need to understand what that sovereignty means, what that jurisdiction means. And in our case, we told Premier Scott Moe, which I had 3 occasions to meet with, and I told him specifically that Shoal Lake Cree Nation is in a position to take back what is rightfully ours, and that's the land and the resources. And if you're, I told him, that if you're talking about the Saskatchewan economy, where does First Nations fit in that economy? And he told me exactly, that yes, First Nations and Indigenous people are part of that economy. So I hold those words on our premier in Saskatchewan. Now I've told the assembly in the past that I sat before 3 prime ministers, and I said the same thing. That our sovereignty, we have never given up our sovereignty or jurisdictions over land. And right now, next week, we're this is just one example of what First Nations across the country can do, if they're proactive in terms of what they believe as, their land, their resources. We signed an agreement with Weyerhaeuser, which is a forestry company, and now a different forestry company. Industry is interested in partnering with First Nations. And this is just one example that we'd like to, portray in the province of Saskatchewan. That that we did agree under treaty to share the land, to share the resources, and we're not ones, to break treaty. They were the ones that broke treaty. So I think this project that we're doing, in terms of the clean energy project, it's a biomass project. And we're going to be meeting on July 15th with Weyerhaeuser. And the provincial ministers are going to be there. And we've invited the premier to as well. We've invited Buckley Belanger, who's our MP for our riding. And this is kind of will demonstrate as to what First Nations can really do in terms of reaching out, and taking their part, in taking their rightful place in Canada, and that's to retain the land and to retain the resources, and whatever this bill is intending to do, I don't think that it'll supersede our sovereignty or our jurisdiction. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to leave my comments to that. So that's our position, and we do have a general statement that we'll be presenting with the Prime Minister next week. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Chief Martin.
I just forgot, the room here is the Prince Albert Grand Council Chiefs.
Very good, thank you. So we've got the Prince Albert Grand Council Chiefs and Chief Head with the Shoal Lake Cree Nation, Miigwech. Drew Lafont, are you able to respond or provide some comment to Chief Carr's comments and questions? So I'll turn it over to legal for a response. Drew Lafont, if we can have IT unmute Drew. There we go.
I think the question that was posed by the chief from Hiawatha was whether or what was the interaction or interplay between the federal bills and the two bills that we've seen coming out of the province of BC and province of Ontario. It would be Bill 5 in the case of Ontario, Bill 15 in the case of BC, and Bill C-5 federally. So as I had mentioned during my presentation, Bill C-5, the National Building Act, creates a framework, like it's a skeletal piece of legislation that's intended to create a framework for regulatory approval to be expedited for national interest projects. The interplay between Bill C-5 and the province's legislative jurisdiction is really only set out in two sections. The first of which is what requires 30 days notice to the provinces in advance of designating a project to be a national interest project. The second is if a project of national interest happens to fall within the boundaries of a province exclusively, then the consent of that province is going to be required before the project becomes a project of national interest. So that's the way in which the federal government has incorporated the voices of the province in connection with that. Now, it's very important to mention that there were consent requirements for the provinces built into Bill C-15 that I just mentioned, but no analogous, similar, or any obligations akin to what you would see for the provinces in the case of First Nations. There's no consent requirement for First Nations in the event that a project operates exclusively within perhaps a treaty territory, or if a project is going to be built or is going to operate exclusively within the asserted, claimed, or Aboriginal title lands of First Nations. So again, another matter where the treatment towards the province in terms of their consultation and consent is different from the consultation and consent requirements for First Nations.
Miigwech, thank you very much, Drew, for the response. So I am mindful of the time. We did schedule the closing prayer at 5 minutes to the hour, so we do have a number of hands that are raised. So we are going to close the speakers list at this point, and we will acknowledge 4 more chiefs that have raised their hands, and we'll do 2 at a time, and then if there's a response required, we'll do the last 2. So the order is Chief Rhonda Phillips, and then Chief Shauna Thomas, and then Chief Archie Wabas, and then Chief Ed John. So we will start with Chief Rhonda Phillips. IT, if you can please unmute Chief Phillips. Chief Phillips, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, my camera doesn't work. Hello, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and thank you to the chair and to the presenters today. My name is Rhonda Phillips, and I'm Gookby of Hatsooth First Nation. I'm calling in today from our community on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Secwepemc people, Secwepemc Ulu. And I just have some comments that I wanted to share. And first, I just want to state that Hatsooth is not opposed to development. We understand the importance of infrastructure and economic opportunity for all Canadians, including First Nations, but that development must be done in partnership, not through token gestures. Right now, Bill C-5 does not meet that standard. We're deeply concerned that Bill C-5, alongside BC's Bills 14 and 15, could further undermines our rights, our title, and our decision-making authority. These provincial bills already weaken environmental protections, and that's a big concern for Hatsooth. Now that the federal bill, it risks fast-tracking projects with limited First Nations oversight. I just want to give an example. Right now, Hatsooth is currently in a judicial review against the province of BC over the approval of the Mount Poly tailing storage facility raise. We weren't properly consulted. We were treated more like a box to check off, something that I call drive-by consultation. I've heard that term used a lot by many of the chiefs across the nation. It's not meaningful, it's not respectful, and it certainly isn't reconciliation. Even more troubling, we were in our court last week, and another First Nation had filed an affidavit in support of the proponent and stated that Hatsuth First Nation was consulted. And, you know, I just have to state we had not been consulted, and who are they to say that? You know, our voice is our own voice, and no other First Nation has the right to speak for us, especially without our consent. You know, that behavior, it undermines unity, and it creates division among First Nations when we should be standing together. And that's one of the most troubling parts that I see of Bill C-5 as well. It creates further division between nations. Those who are told they'll benefit and those who are told to carry the burden. That's not equity. It's not consent. That's divide and conquer. We're not asking for a veto. We're not asking, you know, we're asking to be at that decision-making table. We have every right to be. So I just want to say that, you know, like I agreed with what Regional Chief Terry TG had said earlier. You know, we need to have meaningful participation, true co-development, and an investment in our capacity to engage on equal footing. You know, and we should be going forward with a united voice, not just asking for consultation, but standing firm in our collective demand for consent. Consent is not optional. It is our right under Canadian law, under UNDRIP, and under our own laws. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to have the time to speak today, Cookstetten.
Thank you very much, Miigwech. Next, we had on our list Chief Shauna Thomas. Chief Shauna Thomas, are you still there? If so, if we can have IT, please unmute Chief Thomas. There you go.
Thank you. And the Paklachalawatsa, Tanikit Wak Leixon. Good afternoon. I'm Shanna Thomas, Hereditary Chief of Leixon First Nation. I just want to thank all of the presenters, Regional Chief Terry TG and Ovid Mercredi, as well as Chief Abram Benedict. Regional Chief, I thought you were going to share your video for folks who haven't seen the BCAFN video. I think it's a really powerful video, and I think it's something that should be shared broadly. And former National Chief Ovid Mercredi, good to see you again. And Ovid did work in our territory many, many moons ago, and glad to see you still active and providing really good advice. Just want to note a few things. One, the environmental assessment issues we face very deeply here in British Columbia as well. While there is a need for an Indigenous-led environmental assessments where we look at projects based on impacts, based on how we utilize territory, the proponent is responsible for funding our participation and engagement. And so the issues in terms of timelines for us in British Columbia that they complain about aren't timelines that are reality. They're timelines that are created because the proponent refuses to engage and provide the adequate resources for First Nations to participate in a meaningful way. So we end up spending 6 months, 8 months, a year negotiating with the proponent. Meanwhile, the clock on the EA process is going and everyone's, moving forward without us and our meaningful participation. So anything to do with fast tracking as it relates to sidestepping environmental assessment is detrimental to our communities, and just want to support what I heard previous speakers say in that regard. Not only is it an archaeological issue that we need to ensure that we're not further erased out of our own territories, but it's fundamental to all of the future of our children and our grandchildren. And I really appreciate us sticking to the commentary. Both Regional Chief and Ovid spoke very passionately about ensuring that we recognize that these are our inherent rights entitled to our territories and our responsibilities, and there's nothing that has been given to us by the colonial crown. We have not been given anything through the UN Declaration. We have not been given anything through Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution. Those are both colonial instruments that they have created for themselves. And I think we need to continue, as Regional Chief Terry Teegee stated and Ovid stated in his comments, this is about recognizing our inherent rights and title, recognizing our SNOAID, our laws, our responsibilities in relation to our territories. I look forward to seeing chiefs who are able to be there next week so that we really can bring home that message. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Thomas, for those comments. I didn't hear a direct question, but I think very strong statements, things that need to be considered moving forward. So miigwech for that. So again, two more chiefs that had raised their hands, but I do see in the Q&A box, I had one more, and I will read that just to have it into the record. This is from Michelle Edwards. And Michelle writes, how does aging infrastructure that needs replacement fit into these mega projects? These projects will have the potential to cause irreversible harm to the environment, so fast-tracking them will lead taking our ways of life away and the animals that have their own way. Municipalities will need to replace water lines, sewer lines to build up their community. These communities are built on our ancestors. How will government work with us to protect our past? This will be a very costly bill for municipalities and crown corporations. Also, Regional Chief Teegee has put in the box as well, just an FYI, the BC First Nations Summit and the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs both passed resolutions at their respective chiefs meetings to reject and repeal Bill C-5. Thank you for that, Chief Teegee. So again, two more chiefs. Egawinstam Ogumakan Archie Wabas. I'm going to turn over to Archie Wabas. Ginstam Nandawikidien. IT, if I can have you unmute Chief Wabas, please. Go ahead. And I see you're still muted. So IT, we're going to turn over to Chief Archie Wabas. And we're not there. There we go. Chief Wabas, go ahead. It looks like you're unmuted from our end. I saw your lips moving, but we couldn't hear you. I'm not sure. It might be your microphone at your end, but you're unmuted at our end. Give it a try.
Hello.
There you are. Dago.
Okay, Miigwech, Adam. Thank you for chairing the meeting once again. I just came online late when regional chief from Ontario was talking. I'm very concerned and also interested in this topic. My question is a legal question. What we need to do also is flood with our letters to Canada and also to the provincial governments concerning these bills or these laws that have not consulted meaningfully in a respectful manner. Not like they've what they've said is they're going to pass the bill and they'll consult after, and that's not a way to deal with our nations, because we are recognized as a sovereign nation in Canada. So I would like to ask legal, like, what kind of information on the letter should we have? Keep sending those letters to the Prime Minister and provincial governments, and we when we come to litigation or legal claims, it will be in the record, you know. And also it might change their tone, you know. It might change their tone, or if they might repeal the act because there's so much, so many letters and responses from from the First Nations of Canada. So that's my question: is the legal context of each letter? Like, what do we need to put there? Okay. And the other one is the pressure is coming from Donald Trump, right? The pressure is coming from Donald Trump. My question to the national chief is: has she consulted the nations, our brothers and our sister nations in U.S.? Have they talked about between Canada nations and U.S. nations that they work together, that we work together and try to change Trump's mind in pressuring Canada, because it's affecting the true nations of this continent, which is us. All right, thank you. You got.
Great, thank you very much, Chief Wabas. So 2 questions. The legal question, I'm going to pause for now. We'll get legal counsel Drew Lafond to respond to that, but we'd like to go to the final speaker. And also there was a political question regarding National Chief, whether there has been discussions with fellow Indigenous people across the border in the United States. For now, I will come back though. For now, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Edward John. Chief John, the last time we had an echo, so if there's a second device that you're listening to in the room, maybe you can pause it just so that we don't get the echo. But go ahead. IT, please unmute Chief Edward John. Go ahead, Chief John. We can see your lips moving, but we can't hear you. So IT, if we can have Chief John unmuted, and if you can unmute from your end as well. There we go.
Can you hear me?
All right. We are getting an echo, so there might be a second.
Let me just give me a second to do something about this.
While we are doing that, now I'm getting an echo. Maybe what we'll do is, while Chief John is turning off the device, Drew Lafond, if I can turn it over to you on the legal question. If I can have IT unmute Drew Lafond, please.
Hello. Can you hear me, Adam?
Yeah, go ahead.
Excellent. The question, I think, was what should be included in an advocacy letter to the federal and the provincial governments. And I think one of the things, in addition to the obvious points of you'd want to identify, there's strength in numbers and you'd want to identify common areas of interest. The duty to consult is owed by each crown independently, the federal and the provincial crowns. So I think tailoring your answer or tailoring your questions and your demands to each crown, I think, is going to be very important in this case, because they're 2 very separate areas of jurisdiction that are being targeted here. And I think there does need to be a multifaceted approach to both the federal and provincial governments, and integrating the viewpoints of as many different groups as possible within a given area of common interest, whether that's treaty, non-treaty, whether that's within the boundaries of a province. I think that's going to be important. But I think what really needs to be driven home here, in addition to the ordinary things that we would include in a letter, a demand letter, would be at the end of the day, what is being requested, what is being demanded in this case? Are there any substantive points in addition to the procedural shortcomings of these bills that we're starting to see? And I've already heard a number of different ones that have been raised and invoked here by the chiefs, talking about their own experiences with the lack of consultation and how their rights to the environment are being infringed as a result of that. I think those are powerful messages that need to be included in these letters. And that will represent the spearhead. That's going to be the very first point of contact for your litigation strategy. Again, the litigation strategy is going to have to be formulated very meticulously, but I think for the first part, which is just getting the correspondence out of the door to put the governments on notice that there is opposition to this bill, I think it's very important to talk about proposed alternative solutions and specifically some areas that this bill is going to exacerbate the damage to your rights as rights holders.
Miigwech, thank you very much, Drew. What I'm going to suggest, and I know Chief Wabas wasn't here for your presentation, if you can, if we can have AFN staff share Drew Lafon's contact information with Chief Wabas, so that we can get we can follow up offline. And I'm getting the sort of the go ahead with Chief Wabas. So if that can happen, so that we can get some help there as well. As part of the response, I did see Regional Chief Benedict, your hand was raised. I'm not sure if it's a response to the question, but I'll look to Ontario Regional Chief Benedict. If we're going to have IT unmute the Ontario Regional Chief, please. I'm assuming or hoping it's a response to the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, it is, Adam. Thanks. I'll go, Chief Wabas, for that. Just on the American component of the of your question, and so through the Office of the Ontario Regional Chief, you recall that the we help and support the Jade Treaty Border Alliance, the JTBA. And so that is an advocacy group made up of First Nations, predominantly along the Canada-United States border. And so part of the advocacy work we're doing there, we have a number of tribal partners that we meet with regularly, through our lobby works in Washington and in Ottawa around the border. And so the tariff situation, the attack on sovereignty is definitely one of the conversations that we continue to have with our tribal partners who are challenged by, in many cases, the approach of the U.S. administration themselves. I mean, it's quite obvious that there's only a small group that the president caters to, and it's definitely not tribal leaders in the United States, sadly. And so we are advocating through that. There was also, on behalf of the AFN, they are working on an MOU with the NCAI, which is the National Congress of American Indians, to revitalize that MOU that exists. And so that was scheduled to be advanced at our assembly in July, which has been pushed to September. And so there's some advocacy working happening there with respect to the American government. And so those are some of the avenues that we're channeling information and sharing information on: the J Treaty Border Alliance and the MOU relationship with the AFN and the NCAI.
Great, thank you very much, Regional Chief Benedict. Also, the question was directed to the National Chief, so I'm going to turn it over to Julie McGregor with the National Chief's office to respond to that question on behalf of the National Chief. So, IT, if you can please unmute Julie McGregor, please. Julie, go ahead.
Let me on. All right, thank you for that, Adam. To answer Chief Wabas's question with respect to has National Chief been engaged with our American cousins in the South? Absolutely. I think as soon as the Trump administration started levying tariffs, threatening tariffs, that was earlier in the spring, just after January. National Chief attended down south in Washington, the National Congress of American Indians, as Regional Chief Benedict alluded to. She met with them at their assembly, and it was a very productive discussion. We've invited them to come to the assembly, the AGA, which was postponed, but will be happening in early September. We've heard a lot of different sort of feedback from NCAI. They're very keen to ensure that the trading relationship between First Nations in Canada and the American tribes continues to be a fruitful relationship. They're feeling the hurt a lot from the lack of business coming south from Canada. So they want to make sure that they're not happy either. So they want to make sure that we are strengthening those ties between First Nations and American tribes. And as Regional Chief said, we're looking to renew our MOU relationship with NCAI, and we're looking for ways in which we can strengthen those relationships, including the J Treaty border alliance as well. So that work is ongoing, and we're hoping to sort of showcase that in September. Miigwech.
Great, Miigwech. Thank you very much, Julia, for the response on behalf of the National Chief. Chief Edward John, let's give it another shot. If we can have Chief John unmuted, please. So we'll unmute you from our end, and if you can unmute from your end. Your lips are moving, but I can't hear you. IT, if we can have Chief Edward John unmuted, and if you can do it from your end as well, Chief John. Last time we could hear you twice. This time we can't hear you at all. Oh, there you are.
Here I am. Double is good. So I really want to thank you, moderator, for today's session. I think it was well handled. I want to thank all of the presenters. I want to thank our regional chiefs, TG and Benedict, as well as Ovid's presentation on the panel here. Regional Chief Terry TG talked about the role that I played in the development of the UN Declaration in Geneva over the many years with many other Indigenous peoples globally. And so I have a bit of a background, but I'm not standing on that as the elected chief of Glasgow Nation. I plan to be at the event next week. Our nation's put together a short 11-page statement with respect to C-5, parts 1 and 2, and some analysis, but with some recommendations going forward that's important. We know that the response of Canada and British Columbia and the other provinces has been to this, what they call the existential threat, the sovereignty of the Crown, federal, Crown, provincial, sovereignty of the way of life, sovereignty to infrastructure, natural resources. The U.S. Trump is doing exactly what the governments have been doing to our peoples over countless generations. The existential threat that they talk about is the very same existential threat that we have been living under for decades and in fact, a couple of centuries. But there are some suggestions in the 11-page report. Not sure I provided a copy of this to Chief TG, or Regional Chief TG. It's very clear that Bill C-5 is a violation of the human rights standards as set out in Article 19 of the Declaration, as well as that is supported by federal legislation, and in our case in British Columbia by provincial legislation. In any circumstances, everything should proceed without prejudice to Indigenous peoples' rights and freedoms in the Declaration. That the Declaration speaks to freedoms as well as rights. Truth and reconciliation should be considered in the national interest as well. The issue of reconciliation can't just be isolated, standalone. It's been interpreted by the courts, and as the courts have also said that the UN Declaration is fundamental to reconciliation in Canada with Indigenous peoples, and that has to be in the national interest. They can't just take a selected set of interests and call those in the national interest. These are including lands, territories, and resources of our peoples. Section 9124, that should be revisited. In the past, it's been used as a blunt instrument for assimilation. As the courts have shifted Canada into an era of reconciliation, that has to be in the national interest. Section 9124 can't be used as it has been in the past, and we need to hear governments that they will not use it ever again in the way that they have used it. The Indigenous governments, at the United Nations. We need to have our place and our seat at the United Nations as Indigenous peoples, even as an observer status. There is a proposal going to the Human Rights Council next week at the United Nations EMRA, Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Canada needs to stand strongly that Indigenous governments do not have to register as non-governmental organizations as they do now. Their government status in this country as sovereign governments need to be recognized, and that they should be able to register at the United Nations in that capacity as well. Good faith negotiations. Imagine treaty negotiations. British Columbia has been going on for 33 years, and there's been maybe half a dozen to 10 agreements reached. If the governments of Canada and British Columbia are able to move as expeditiously as they did in response to the threats from the US, surely they're able to respond to these natural resource, lands, territories, and resources issues as expeditiously as well. The last point I wanted to make is respect to King Charles' speech at the throne speech, where he said that basically said that it is with great hope that each of your communities and collectively as a country path is found towards truth and reconciliation in both word and deed. This was the throne speech that gave rise to C-5, but this part of the throne speech is not included. But the point I want to make is that the Royal Commission, TRC called 45, number 45, talks about a royal proclamation of reconciliation. And this is something that I think as First Nations across this country, we can bring back to the King directly and, elevate the status and clarify and renew the relationship. When he was talking about on May 27th, the way he was talking, it brought back to my mind the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which exactly had the same content, the same kind of words, and the same caution to the colonies in dealing with the Indigenous nations and tribes with whom we are connected. So I'm trying to think in the same context that we're talking about, but seeing that all of what we're doing is not really new. Our ancestors have gone through these places, and they've stood firm and on solid ground as the Indigenous peoples with international recognized rights as well as rights recognized in the Constitution. We went to London to protest against the repatriation of the 1982 Constitution, which had Section 35 rights, and we were able to use those 17 words in Section 35(1) to fight our way and open doors in this country that we've never opened before. And we've augmented that with the United Nations Declaration with 46 articles and hundreds of words that can help interpret the continued relationship between First Nations and Crown governments. We have to stand on those court decisions as well as some of them, as limited as they may be. The word consultation is pretty limited in many respects, but if you open it up as consultation between governments, such as the federal government and consultation with the provincial governments, well, in the legal pluralism nature of our rights and our peoples, I think there is another order of government, the original orders of government in this country that factor in this, and those consultations are on a government-to-government basis into the future. So I just wanted to share those comments as we think about what to say next week. And thank you, National Chief, for opening this, and thank you to the Elder for the opening prayer. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chief John, for those comments. And with that, that concludes our session. We are a little over time. I didn't hear any questions, so I'm not going to turn it over to anybody to respond. We are a little bit over time, but I think it was important to hear from everyone that wished to speak and to make statements and provide direction moving forward. So again, this has been a special session being put on by the Assembly of First Nations for leadership to have discussions and also take their own positions moving forward on the legislation. So with that, gana na chumnawa gachkana miigwech gadinawa magagi pijaik wech chadajinjigewin gagi pagadnamik. So I'd like to turn it over to our knowledge keeper, Leonard Weasel Traveler, for his closing prayer. And with that, I'd like to say miigwech thank you to everyone. Leonard, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I listened to the very knowledgeable, wise leadership and chiefs. Once again, I go to you, Creator, in humility. I ask you for blessings. I ask you to empower our chiefs. I ask you to pity us and help us move forward. A great number of our First Nations across the country here are suffering in so many ways. We need your divine intervention, God, Creator. Help us, help our leaders, our chiefs, our regional chiefs, our national chief, all our technicians. We need your help so very much right now in the time of just really not knowing where things are going to come from. But we need your help, Creator. Special blessings for all of us here with the forest fires, everything that's going on. We need you. We need your help, Creator. Give us blessings. Give us what we need, and coming to you with total humility, Creator. Amen. Thank you.